Okay, I want to continue with Descartes, the meditations. In the first meditation, I went over the M, the 5 points of the M, and I made M stand for murder. What's being murdered in the first meditation is certainty. Descartes, the whole point of at the beginning of the meditations is Descartes is looking to establish a foundation on which science can be erected. And he, as a rationalist, he believes that all knowledge um, has to be certain knowledge. It can't just be probable, and so he needs a starting point that cannot be doubted. That's what he's searching for in the first meditation. He's basically fighting skepticism. He's trying to out-skeptic the skeptics. And by the end of the first meditation, he introduces the evil genius who can be tricking us and deceiving us even when we add 2 and 3 or count the sides of a triangle. His solution to the skeptical problem is in the second meditation, when he concludes that even if the evil demon is deceiving him in everything he thinks, at least he has to exist in order to be deceived. And that's the famous cogito ergo sum. So in the second meditation, that's where we are. All Descartes knows is that all that Descartes can be certain of is a point. And that point is his own cogito, his own existence. He can't know that anything else exists. He can't know that other people exist, that other minds exist. He can't know that a world exists, because all these things are based upon his thinking and his perception, and he could be deceived. He sees a tree. Well, it doesn't mean there's a tree there. It could be a hallucination. The only thing he knows with certainty is that the I exist. I, René Descartes, exist. That doesn't seem to be a very promising foundation on which to build a foundation for science, because science is concerned with understanding the world. And if you don't know a world exists, it's going to be pretty hard to understand something that doesn't exist. So the question that Descartes has to do, what Descartes needs to do, in beginning with the second meditation, is to find some way to get beyond this point of his own consciousness and to come into contact with the world. How's he going to do that? Well, what he does is he says, in this cogito that thinks, I think, therefore I am. Descartes says, I have many thoughts. I have thoughts of trees, and I have thoughts of the sun and the moon, because these are thoughts that he has. I mean, he could be deceived, but they still are thoughts in his mind. He has many, many thoughts, and he can enumerate those. He has thoughts of triangles, thoughts of squares, thoughts of tables, thoughts of dogs, thoughts of cats. But one of the thoughts that he has, that he comes across when he just kind of, is reflecting in his ideas, one of the thoughts that he has is a thought of a perfect being. Now, whether a perfect being exists outside his mind, that's a different question. But he at least he has the idea of a perfect being, or what we call God. He has this idea of God, of a perfect being. Now he has thoughts of trees, he has thoughts of triangles, thoughts of unicorns. Just because you think of a unicorn doesn't mean unicorns exist. But he has this idea of a perfect being. Okay, now he reflects that this idea of a perfect being, the idea itself means he has an idea of a being which is perfect, which means that this being can be characterized by all the perfections. This being possesses all the perfections. So this being, you think of all the things that are we consider good to the maximal degree. So this being is perfectly good, perfectly loving, perfectly all powerful, and all knowing. So he has all these perfections, but one of the perfections is existence. So he has this idea of a perfect being. He has an idea of a perfect being who possesses a perfect being who possesses all the perfections. Now, it may be all perfections. Now, it may be that there's just because you have an idea of this being doesn't mean that this being exists. And Descartes distinguishes between essence and existence. Essence and existence. So the essence of something is basically a list of all the conditions that it must meet in order to be that thing. You can have a concept of a mountain. Say you're thinking of a certain mountain. Now, if you're thinking of a mountain, Descartes says you have to, part of the essence of a mountain includes the idea of a valley, because you can't have a mountain without a valley. A valley, when there's a mountain, there's a valley. I could be thinking of some mountain outside my room. It doesn't mean there's a mountain there, but if the essence of that mountain, whatever, even if it doesn't exist, does include that of a valley. The difference between essence and existence. I can think of a unicorn. If I'm thinking of a unicorn, I have to be thinking of something. So it would be some horse, some magnificent horse that has a spiral horn. Now, the essence and existence are different things. I can say I have the idea of a unicorn in my mind, but that the question, does it exist, is a separate question. So essence and existence have to be separated. So you might have an idea of a perfect God. So you have the essence would be that God possesses all these perfections. The next question will be, does such a God exist? Descartes' argument is that the essence of this God that he's thinking about includes all the perfections, and existence is a perfection. So when it comes to God, this perfect being, existence is part of the essence. God's essence includes his existence. So it doesn't make, so it's a false step to ask whether can you conceive of that God as not existing? No, because existence is a perfection. It's part of the very essence of God. And that only applies to a perfect being. It doesn't apply to any finite being. It doesn't refer to mountains or unicorns or anything else, because the only thing of which the essence involves existence is a perfect being. So God's very essence means that God, you cannot even conceive of God as not existing. Basically, what Descartes is doing is that's just simply another form of Anselm's ontological argument. So from his existence, this point, the cogito, Descartes concludes that God exists. This perfect being exists, and he knows that because God's essence involves God's existence. Basically, he goes from his existence to God's existence using a form of the ontological argument. So now Descartes has himself, and now he knows that God exists. Now, this God has all the perfections. One of the perfections is that God is good. And one of the implications is that God, since God is good, God would not purposely deceive him. Okay? That's very important. So Descartes then concludes that when he opens his eyes and he looks at the world, and it seems to him that there are things in the world, that there's a world outside himself that has trees, mountains, and so on. So he's looking at the world through his sense perception, and it looks to him evident that there are things outside of himself. It definitely looks like he has hands, he has arms, he has a body, that there are trees, that there are the sun, that there's mountains and oceans. These seem to be beyond any doubt. Now, if he does everything within his power to make sure that he's not being rash, and making too quick judgments, he says God would be a deceptive God if the things outside of himself were really not there. So, for example, Descartes, if he was holding this pen, would say, look, everything tells me that there's something here. there, and if I look carefully and I'm make sure that I'm not asleep, I'm not dreaming, I'm not on drugs, you do everything in your power, and like there has to be something here. Everything, and there has to be a tree out there, there has to be a mountain. He says, if there isn't something outside of me, and I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that I'm not being deceived, then God is deceiving me, because he definitely makes it look like there is something outside of me. Descartes says it sure well seems to me, it seems totally self-evident that there's a world outside of me. Now, if there is no world outside of me, this God, who is a perfect God, is deceiving me. He's created me to believe things that are not true. So Descartes' view is this: if we do everything within our capacity to make sure that we're not being deceived about what we think is outside of us, then we can know with certainty that it really is there. And so Descartes said, now again, you have to do everything within your power to mean not deceived. I mean, if you look at a cup and it looks like the straw is bent, and you just say, well, the straw is bent. Well, if you take the straw out, you see it's not bent. But if you don't take the straw and you just say you believe that it is bent, that's your problem, not God's problem, because God gave you a mind, and Descartes would say God expects you to do what's in your power to check things out. So it's within your power to take the straw out and to see if it really is bent. So if you just believe things on first sight, that's not God's problem. It's your problem. But if you do everything within your power to make sure you're not deceived, then you can be certain that things are the way they seem to be. So anyway, now Descartes he's got the world back. And his proof of God is in the third meditation. So anyway, he went from the second meditation, where all he knew is that he existed, the point. Through the ontological argument, he got God back. And then, since God is good, he also gets the world back. So he knows there is a world outside of himself. This world, though, is not the world that he started with, and I'll talk about that. It's simply the world that can be done through mathematics. It's a mathematized world. I'll talk about that later. But he does get a world back from he gets the world back. It's a world of extended things. So now we have the cogito, we have the world, and we have God. And so that's where this occurs. This is now in the third meditation. Let me say one problem though with this. I'm going to talk a little about how Descartes goes from here to here. How does Descartes go from the self to God? That's called there's a problem there. It's called the Cartesian circle. So let me explain a little about the Cartesian circle. The Cartesian circle is basically accusing Descartes of begging the question, or basically it's circular reasoning, because his argument is this: God exists because of the ontological argument, because of my reason tells me so, basically the ontological argument. But then there's a problem there, because you can then ask the question, how is it that he can trust his reason? If in the first meditation he couldn't trust his reason even to count the sides of a triangle, or to count that 2 and 3 is 5, how can he trust his reason that God exists, which is the ontological argument, which is much more complicated than 2 and 3 is 5? His reason is this: we can trust our reason because God is perfect, and God would not be deceiving him. So God exists because his reason tells him so, but the reason he can trust his reason, the reason he can trust his reason, is because God is perfectly good, and will not be deceiving him. That's obviously begging the question. You cannot appear what you're trying to prove. He's trying to prove that God exists. You cannot have as one of your premises any reference to God to validate your reason, because God is that which you're trying to prove. That's called the Cartesian circle. And it seems like there's really no way, once Descartes has introduced the evil genius, to get outside of the cogito, because the evil genius can be deceiving you whenever you're using your reason. That's Cartesian circle.